Okay, next up, we're going to jump straight ahead into iMicrobes. And to tell you all about what they're up to, delighted to welcome Noah Helman, their founder and CEO, and Matt Engler, their VP of Business Development, to the stage. Gentlemen, there's your clicker. I will get you some chairs.
I don't think we need chairs. We'll be good. Yeah, we'll just jump right in. Great. Thanks very much, everyone. I want to start by just asking you to imagine a parent walking into the store to buy diapers or nappies for their baby. And they look at the shelf and they see two options. One is the traditional product, and the other is a sustainable version of the same thing. Which one do you think they buy? Well, yeah, one of them is cheaper, right? Okay, well, let's pretend that they're exactly the same cost. Now, which one do you think they pick? I bet some of you are thinking, I bet the sustainable one doesn't work as well. And if you've had a baby, you know you buy the diapers that work. If they don't work, that's a big mess, literally. So why don't we have these kinds of products, right? This is a big challenge that we're trying to go after. Everybody knows that we want products that are the same or better as we have today, that can be made sustainably with no carbon footprint and at an equal or lower cost. But it's a real challenge to do that, right? That's what we're all trying to work towards. And that's sort of what we're here to talk about today. So my name is Noah Helman. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Industrial Microbes. I'm here with my colleague, Matt Engler, VP of our business development. And to get to this kind of solution, the thing that everybody wants, there's sort of two things you need to do. One is you need to develop a technology that can meet the performance characteristics at that low cost, and then you need to be able to bring that product to market. And so I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the rationale where we came up to develop this process to reach a low-cost product, and then I'll hand it over to Matt, and he'll talk about how we're going to bring that to market. So we're used to thinking about trade-offs, right? You can have generally two of these three things. You can have a product that's low cost, or high performance, or low carbon footprint, but it's difficult to get all three of those things. And that's where an innovative technology can come in and kind of break the mold here. We all know that biomanufacturing can be a technology that can develop a drop-in product, and we know that it can be a product that can be low carbon footprint because it's inherently chemistry that happens at low temperatures, and it's easy to electrify, so you can imagine using low carbon electricity for all the stirring and pumping of your fermentation process and so forth. And where most projects have failed or been tripped up is around cost, right? So what we've discovered from looking at this over the course of the last couple decades is that the cost is solved in the design phase of this process. If you start thinking about it from the very beginning, you can systematically look at where are the cost drivers for biomanufacturing. And so that's what we've done. And we've identified the two main costs are, of course, the cost of the feedstock and the cost of the isolation and purification of the final product. Okay? So at Industrial Microbes, we're focusing on making a bio-based acrylic acid. If you're not familiar with that product, it's used to make diapers and paints and coatings and adhesives and all sorts of other products. So the first step in our process is a fermentation, and I mentioned we need to think about what is the feedstock that we're going to put into that product. The next step is separating the product that comes out of the fermentation to make what we call the crude product, and then another step to actually get to bio-based acrylic acid at the end. So typically, as you probably know, most fermentations start with purified sugars as the feedstock. In our design analysis, what we discovered was that you could actually start with a combination of ethanol and carbon dioxide and end up with a lower cost process. So that's where we're starting. Ethanol is actually an incredible feedstock for making renewable chemicals. In the US, for example, it's already produced at very large scale for the fuel market. It can be a carbon negative feedstock for chemical production, and it's cost advantaged over sugar for this particular product. You can also imagine today we're starting with ethanol that comes from sugarcane or corn, but in the future, emerging technologies are getting us to being able to use all sorts of different waste products to get to ethanol. So we see that as a platform molecule, a building block that's going to be common around the world different kinds of wastes will be converted into ethanol as a feedstock for fuels and chemicals. So then what are we going to make as our crude product? Well, we identified a different strategy where we're actually making the product and keeping it inside the cell. So we've engineered our microorganism to accumulate a biopolymer called P3HP, the PHA, similar to what we heard earlier. And that polymer accumulates into the cell more than 80% of its weight. So here's an image from a paper from a while ago showing that the E. coli can fill up to a very high fraction of its weight with this polymer. And the reason we do that is it ends up simplifying dramatically the downstream steps. And when you simplify those steps, you significantly reduce the cost. So it's an insoluble polymer. It doesn't inhibit the pathway. It can accumulate to these high levels, and it reduces the number of steps in the downstream process and reduces the costs. So in the end, our process is very simple. We convert ethanol and CO2 through fermentation into these cells containing this polymer, and then just a couple of steps involving heating and distillation to get to our final product of bio-based acrylic acid. When we plug that into our techno-economic model, what we discover is that it's possible to achieve both low cost and net zero production at the same time. So this is an apples to apples comparison of a large scale acrylic acid process compared to the traditional process. We find that regardless of whether you have a government support or carbon credits, even just competing on costs, our process specs out at about 20% lower cost. We've already started our scale-up journey. Last year, we took this process to the 1,500 liter fermentation volume at IBRL in Illinois in the US, and we've been developing many kilograms of product that we've been sending out to partners, and later this year, we'll scale up another tenfold to an 18,000 liter fermenter, and at that point we'll just be one step away from the commercial scale production. And that's why we're here, and we're excited to be talking to companies about transitioning into commercialization. So with that, I'll hand it over to Matt.
Thanks, Noah. So hopefully you can all see why I was inspired to join iMicrobes late last year, a little over 8 months ago. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what happens after scale up, and actually what happens while we're scaling up, and how we get from the left side in the lab to commercialization and actually having product on the shelf. And I'm going to, in the next, 3 minutes or so, be very quick about showing you what the value chain looks like for acrylic acid, tell you what we think is broken in the existing collaboration model, and how we are approaching collaborating to make technologies come from the market through commercialization. All right, so as I said, a couple minutes. I'm not going to talk about this slide other than to say I want you to look at 2 aspects of it, and I'm happy to share it after the talk if anyone's interested. First, the distance between the left side and the right side, and how many different blocks there are to go from a feedstock all the way to a consumer product that's on the shelf. And then vertically, the broad range of applications for acrylic acid, which goes from diapers, as Noah said, all the way through cosmetics, personal care, coatings, lots of different applications. But let's look at one particular hypothetical example, a case study. So let's say a personal care or a cosmetics brand wants to adopt a bio-based ingredient, and in this case, bio-based acrylic acid that industrial microbes can produce. So traditionally, you'll need, just for one ingredient to change, you need 3 or 4 separate collaborations, agreements, showing confidence that the next customer in the supply chain is going to buy the intermediate product to eventually end up in your consumer product. It's really a long distance from developing this biomaterial to actually getting it on the shelf. And that's where a lot of companies like ours fail. I've seen it over the past almost 2 decades now of getting a technology that's great, scales up really well, But getting that gap from producing the product to the market is just, too much to overcome, and it's not thought about early enough. We think that customers will adopt it if it's available. So what we suggest is to reduce the distance by developing partnerships along and across the value chain. And really what that means is sitting together with partners from feedstock through manufacturing, through distribution, and sitting together and coming up with a solution. And we think that when we do that, I've seen it time and time again, that sitting with manufacturers and customers, consumer brands, that our success will be inevitable. Finally, the challenge with these partnerships is initially they can seem overly complex and a daunting task. We argue that these can be really simple. There's a wide range of different partnerships that we really want to discuss, from supply to offtake to letters of intent that express interest in materials. We can simplify those agreements and make it really easy to get through the process within a corporation. So our platform, it's really broad. We're starting with acrylic acid. We can also make products like acrylonitrile, acrylamide. These are things that go into ABS plastic, carbon fiber, a huge range of applications. And we want to talk with folks who are interested in making those products really come to life. So let's talk. Come find us. Thank you.